Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we're going to be talking about special operations handguns, and we're sort of going to lead into the brand new adoption by the Navy SEALs of the Mark 27, which is better known as the Glock 19 Generation 4. SOCOM is actually rather new. It was just formed in 1987. Prior to that, all the U.S. Special Operations Forces, Delta, Green Berets, MARSOC, they were all actually under their own branches. There was no cohesion between the use of all of these Special Operations Forces throughout the U.S. military. Prior to that, most of the Special Operations guys did use a lot of the same weapons as the regular military did. After the formation of SOCOM I believe it was around 1987, then you started seeing more cohesion in what equipment that they would use as well. A lot of these guys would still use some of their own weapons that were specific to them, but we're going to go over sort of from the beginning some of the more common weapons that were utilized by SOCOM. Then we're going to lead into the brand new adoption of the Mark 27, which is pretty incredible considering this pistol was available at the same time the M9 came out in 1985. How we're just getting around to adopting it. But we're going to start off with the beginning of the Special Forces. The main pistol that was always used was the Colt M1911. This is just a standard M1991A1. There were several different versions of this pistol that were used throughout the years. This pistol was pretty much outdated come 1985. Once the adoption of the Beretta or the M9, everything seemed to switch over to the M9 type or the 9mm type. However, there were some special operations units, including the Navy SEALs and even some of the Green Berets or so, which they stuck with the 1911. I'm going to be the first one to say right now, I'm not a 1911 guy. I know there's some people who are probably going to be, how dare you about that. I don't know whether just because it was this pistol was before my time or what it was. I view this as very much being outdated compared to what's available out there today. But there are a lot of people out there who just are typical U.S. military types where they're really entrenched in tradition. So they went with the 1911. This has been utilized by special operations in very heavily modified versions, ones that have been totally reworked, decked out up through the last few years with the adoption of the Marine Corps with the adoption of the Marine Corps MARSOC with the Colt M45A1, which is a modernized 1911 that actually has a rail on it and everything. This was really, I don't know where that sale came from. General Keyes at Colt was a retired 3-star Marine general. I do believe he had a lot to do with getting the Marines to adopt it. The pistol was outdated. It's been outdated. But again, you have that degree of tradition. I can say just from a personal experience of being at the Warrior competition at Casadec or King Abdullah Special Operations Training Center in Jordan, where there was a Special Forces competition between groups from all over the world. And I can recall the Marines coming back and they're being all pissed off because they could not keep up with the guys who were using the SIGs and the Glocks. Their 7 rounds or 8 rounds capacity just was not enough to have the speed of those guys, and these guys were upset because they felt that they were losing some of these competitions because of this. But in that particular case, the M1911 in the U.S. Marine Corps was very short-lived. It did not take very long for that pistol to be out that the Marines got rid of it and went over to the Glock 19 to replace it. But the 1911 has definitely served quite some time with special operations units, not in its normal form. They were always they're always modified into a much more, if you want to call it, more match grade capability. You did see that, but to this day you may still see some of these, but it's not too common. According to the special operations guys, this pistol does not have the durability and reliability for today's battlefield. That's been proven over and over again. So that's going to lead us into some other 45 caliber pistols. In 1985, the U.S. military had switched over to the Beretta M9 pistol. Extremely fine pistol. I'm very much a fan of this pistol. Durable, reliable, safe, having all the features that you would want on a semi-automatic pistol. The round in the chamber with the safety on or off can be fired in double action or by cocking the hammer back to single action. Most importantly, you have a 15-round magazine. So from what it replaced, going from 7 rounds of 45 to 15 rounds of 9mm, this pistol throughout the the U.S. military, its introduction was very, very positive. What they had found was the people who were actually qualifying on the first time with the 45, that number qualified expert on the first time with the 9mm. Now, of course, just switching to the 9mm created havoc within the U.S. military. Again, being avid 45 fans, the 9mm, lack of stopping power, it's all this, and that. But the one thing that you cannot argue with was people would shoot the M9 much better. So I think many people, myself included, believe it's better to have 2 hits with a smaller bullet than 1 miss with a larger bullet. The people who have never handled a gun before, they had a lot more difficulty handling the 1911. And also the M9 pistol had proven to be a lot more durable and reliable than the 1911 ever was. Now, initial Special Forces units, they switched over to the M9 immediately. Except there was one major issue, and that was with the Navy SEALs. The initial runs of the 9mm ammunition in 1987, 88, that time period in there, there was, well, let's just say the ammunition was not made to spec. Due to the changeover from the military 9mm cartridge case from the commercial 9mm cartridge case, you had less powder capacity. The powder cup sat up higher in the 9mm NATO military brass. So what that did was it actually caused a much higher pressure, and it was actually around submachine gun pressures. It was a very high pressure 9mm plus B plus load. And with the SEALs, that actually caused them to have a couple pistols that actually had slide separations, which meant the slide would crack in the area here and here. The slide would came off the pistol and hit a couple operators in the face. So they immediately felt that this pistol was not reliable. It wasn't durable. In fact, it wasn't safe. There's a riff again that was caused with the M9 pistol for as far as the military. They were actually saying they had to replace the slides every 1,000 rounds until they actually found out what went wrong with it. And in the end, the pistol, it wasn't anything wrong with the pistol at all. It was the ammunition itself. That same ammunition cracked the frames of the Sig 226s. However, the Navy SEAL said, we don't want this pistol. We're going to switch over to something else. And they switched over to the Sig 226. The version that we see here is actually the Mark 25. This was the most current version of the 226. The earlier versions of the 226, there was no rail in the front. This is actually set up for a suppressor. They did not have that, and the SEALs have stuck with this with the model 226 right up through actually recently, which we're going to discuss in a little bit. They had found the pistols were more reliable in their experience. The Army had not seen that, but the SOCOM guys did. With the same ammunition that was being used by the Berettas that actually cracked the slides, the SIGs actually had cracked frames, and also the trigger bars would crack on these. The other problem that the SIGs always had was the original 226 was not the one-piece stainless steel slide you see here. It was actually rolled sheet metal. And then you had a steel breech block that was placed inside of that slide and held in with 2 roll pins. One was embedded in the other. They also find that those pins would actually break. So, the SIG had different issues. It had issues as well, but the SIG would go on to remain with the Navy SEALs and several other special operations units as well. So that leads us up to the actual development of SOCOM in 1987. The Mark 23, or what we would like to refer to as the Crew Serve pistol, was the first pistol that was developed with SOCOM. It was sort of a pilot program because SOCOM as a whole had never developed their own pistol. Everybody was using different handguns. In fact, speaking with Gus Taylor, who was one of the heads of SOCOM, he had said that the actual inventories of SOCOM were unbelievable with the amount of pistols that they had in there. Everything from Smith & Wesson revolvers, 1911s, Berettas, SIGs. There was just a tremendous amount of guns. It was a logistical burden. So they created their first joint service program, which was what you see here, the OHWS, or Offensive Handgun Weapon System. They set out a requirement for a pistol that was to be used as an offensive handgun rather than just a defensive. Obviously, you can see from the size of this is a rather large pistol. It was not designed as a sidearm. It was designed as a primary weapon. It was a weapon system. It was the actual pistol, the laser aiming module on the front here, which was a light It was a white light as well as a infrared and a visible laser, and also there was a nice armament suppressor on it, and it was designed as a primary weapon, primarily for sentry incapacitation, or where you needed a quieter pistol for whatever your task was. And it was also developed for two different types of ammunition as well. The standard 45 ball 230 grade full metal jacket, which was subsonic, but it also had a requirement for a more potent round, which was a 185 grain jacketed hollow point plus P. Now the plus P requirement is where the guys with the 1911s really fell short, because those guns would not handle heavy diets of plus P ammunition. You would have there were too many issues with the guns breaking. So the pistol was to have the ability to fire both types of ammunition, which this one did. In the end, this pistol did everything that it was supposed to. In fact, this pistol, probably to this day, still is the most tested pistol in the world. That went through the most rigorous testing. The service life was absolutely phenomenal with it. The barrel was an excellent H&K. It was a hammer forged barrel, which was also chrome plated. So you had the best of both worlds. You had the best of the durability of the Colt hammer forged barrel, plus the additional strength of the chrome plating. You had the rail in the front where you could put your laser aiming module. You had a maritime finish. As you can see, this is not what you would call an aesthetically pleasing finish, but it's actually a type of a lacquer finish that was designed specifically for SEALs who were underwater in salt water, so the pistols would not rust. You can see that the pits are all nickel plated as well for corrosion resistance. 45 caliber handgun that actually held 12 rounds of ammunition. Recoil was extremely moderate because of a patented recoil reduction mechanism. Was truly an excellent pistol. And for all intents and purposes, the program for the Mark 23 was a success until it got out into the hands of the operators. Well, specifically the SEALs, it was just too big. And for most of the people who would see this pistol, they really couldn't grasp the concept behind it, that it was actually a primary weapon and not a sidearm. Because when you would compare this to the 9mm that they had prior to this, and even the 1911 on top of that, the pistol was just large. So unfortunately, the pistol spent more time in the armories than they actually did in use. But these were in use with all the different units: Delta, MARSOC, SEALs, Green Berets, you mentioned it, you name it. This pistol was used by all of them, but unfortunately it was on a very, very limited basis. They did like the concept of the gun, they did like all the design features, but it wasn't the size that really caused the problem. Then comes out the USP 45 Tactical. This was actually preferred over the Mark 23 because it was more, the size was much more what the operators were looking for. It was much more in line with the M9 or the Sig, and it also had all of the major features of the Mark 23. It had the recoil reduction mechanism. It had the excellent sights. It was suppressor capable. It had the same kind of a decocker. You could carry it cocked and locked, or however you wanted. It had the same. It was pretty much the same everything, the same magazine capacity, but it was in a smaller package. So these were actually purchased by several units as a commercial off-the-shelf pistol, and they were used. And later, as the H&K 45 came out, which was a more slimmer version of the pistol, they had started to see some of those H&K 45s in the hands of various SOCOM operators as well. So pretty much the main pistols you still would see were either one of the H&K variants or the Sig 226 or the Mark 25. As time's gone on, the pistols have worn out. They're looking to buy new pistols, and they're looking at really what else was out there. And about 4 weeks ago, SOCOM has adopted a new pistol to replace the 226, and is referred to as the Mark 27 or the Glock 19. This was really, I'm not saying I was surprised. The only thing that really surprised me is that it took this long for them to do it. This pistol here, as you can see from the size, is smaller in every way. Its length, its width, everything is smaller. It holds the exact same amount of ammunition. It's a 15-shot magazine. You have a corrosion-resistant finish, and you have a polymer frame. And the one thing about the Glock that nothing else did in the 9mm range, this is plus P and plus P plus rated. you could fire plus P and plus P plus ammunition out of this thing all day long, and you're not going to damage it. It's a combination of the weight of the actual slide itself, as well as the frame itself. For as far as ammunition, I've shot these guns for years. In fact, I had one Model 17 that I documented 76,000 rounds out of, and the only part that I had ever replaced on it was the trigger return spring. I think I replaced that twice. That was the only part that I'd ever replaced on it, not to mention the barrel itself. This barrel shed just as good at rounds 2 and 3 that it did at 76,000. There was no discernible wear in the barrel that caused any issues with accuracy. And for the special operations guy who's in the corrosion environment of the sea, you have the polymer frame, which is not going to rust, a polymer magazine that's not going to rust, and you have the tenifer finish, which is not going to corrode either. Not to mention, this sucker also fires underwater. I have actually done this myself. It's not something that I recommend anybody doing who's not familiar with it. But underwater, I've actually had this with the actual underwater firing pin cups, because you do have to have a special firing pin cups to prevent the hydraulics of the water from keeping the striker from cycling inside the channel. But with good military ball ammunition, full metal jacket, of course, this will fire all 15 shots to lockback and cycle underwater. Now, that's a testament to the durability of the pistol, but unfortunately, ballistically, bullets don't go very far in water. They stop relatively quickly. Within probably 3 feet or so, this bullet's going to stop, and it's going to fall to the bottom of whatever body of water you're in. If you're up close, within a foot or so, it definitely would be effective underwater. But the Glock offers a degree of reliability and durability that most of the pistols that are out there in the market will not. Oddly enough, the Glock 17 was available in 1985. It was available when the M9 trials were going on. But what killed the Glock was the fact that it did not have a manual safety. That's probably the only thing that kept it from becoming the next U.S. service pistol in 1985, is the M9 pistol. Mr. Glock at the time basically said that he didn't care if it was the American military. His gun was perfection, and he was not going to change his design for the U.S. government, which in the end it didn't really matter, because he's gone on to be probably the largest military supplier of pistols in the world. But there's been some relatively new, with the new SOCOM use of the pistol. It also has been used within the Marine Corps now. This pistol is seeing its way into the U.S. military. There is also rumor that you're going to be seeing another pistol coming out from the SOCOM, and we'll definitely keep you abreast of that. Mark 27 is what this is, and the next pistol is going to be the Mark 28. And I sort of have an idea what that pistol is going to be, but I think I'm going to wait on my opinion until it actually comes to fruition. But SOCOM has had several different, handguns throughout the years. It's always been very difficult to have anybody within the community agree on one pistol. One of the Navy SEALs that I had interviewed with said, there wasn't really an issue within his SEAL unit. He was a West Coast SEAL guy. He says they plainly just carried the P226. That was pretty much all they had in their armory. They did have some of the Mark 23s, but they pretty much just sat there. So I guess it would depend on which unit you were with, of what you would have in your armory at the time. I am pretty sure from everybody I have interviewed, there was no M9s in those inventories within the SEALs. It was not so true with Delta. It was not so true with the Green Berets. MARSOC, on the other hand, they weren't so much for using the M9s. They were really looking for the 1911s and for 45 caliber pistols, which again had drastically changed. I'm trying to remember, it was probably about a year or so ago, or whenever it was, that they actually said, we're done with these Colt M45A1s, and we're going back to the Glocks. So it's interesting evolution to see what's happening with pistols throughout the U.S. military. The U.S. military has been, of most militaries throughout the world, the least handgun savvy. What I mean by handgun savvy is they never looked at the pistol as a vital piece of equipment. They viewed it for primarily as officers or for people who couldn't carry rifles. So for the most part, handgun use is minimal in the U.S. military. Not a lot of money was ever spent on them. It wasn't until recently with the modular handgun program that some money was actually spent to try to develop a new pistol. So you're looking at from 1985 to 2017, the Beretta served as a primary pistol. And then the modular handgun had come, which we're going to be doing another video on, which is going to talk about the individual or the modular handgun program to where our general Army stands today on what they're going. They, for the first time, would be actually switching to a new pistol away from the Beretta. But other militaries throughout the world, you will see soldiers who carry both pistols and rifles. That was something that was very interesting about World War II with the Germans, the Nazis. It was not uncommon to see a regular infantry soldier carrying a P-38 or a Luger or something, or some kind of a pistol. It's always been very common with the U.S. military in combat. When somebody would pick up a pistol, they would carry it from dead enemy. You saw guys in Vietnam carrying Makarovs as well as these other wars, carrying any kind of a pistol they could get their hands on. So I think U.S. was a little bit behind the times for as far as I think seeing the effectiveness of the personal defense weapon as a pistol. They're still bought in relatively small quantities. I believe like 500,000 or so was the Beretta over the last 30 years, compared to how many millions of rifles that you have out there. The handgun technology, oddly enough, has not changed a lot since the inception of the Glock pistol. You're seeing more polymer frame pistols. You're seeing more pistols that are designed to fire the higher pressure ammunition. Every pistol that you see here, these are all my personal pistols. And when it comes down to what I carry on my side, it's a Glock. I carry a Glock Model 30. That's been my personal defense weapon going back probably to 1995 when it came out. My gun that I do training with is a Glock Model 21, full-sized 45. So I do like the 45 caliber, which we've also seen the trends in military right now, as well as law enforcement, of going back to 9mm. Law enforcement particularly. If you go back to the early 80s, police officers were carrying revolvers, 4-inch revolvers, 38 Special 37 Magnum. The Miami incident hit where you had all those FBI agents that were slaughtered because they were basically outgunned with these older weapons. When the M9 was adopted, many police departments had adopted that as well. Most police departments are in a position where they don't have the expertise to actually run a complete weapons program. The ability there is not really to know how to do it or what to do. So you look at the U.S. military and say, hey, they just spent how many millions of dollars to qualify this pistol. What possibly is the military going to do with this pistol that we're not? So they went right to adopt it. So you saw the 9mm pistols. You saw the Smith & Wessons, you saw the SIGs, you saw the Glocks. You saw them all go into service. Now you're going to see around 1991, 92, that area in there, with the inception of the 40 S&W. And the 40 S&W had pretty much taken law enforcement by storm. And then all of a sudden you saw, probably towards the late 90s, a revert going back to 45 auto. You saw a lot of police units, or police departments, SWAT units, and military units going back to the 45. And now we're seeing a swing going back to 9mm. The swing going back to 9mm has a lot to do with the new ammunition that's available. The 9mm poor reputation was based off of the use of ball ammunition. And again, you had a 124 grain bullet going 180 foot a second. The bullet disrupted very little tissue. It went right through, where 45, you had a 230 grain bullet going about 900 feet a second. So, you're being hit with a lot more, if you want, per se, knockdown power. So you would have a more efficient ball round. Well, now we start taking a look at some of the new HST bullets put out by Federal. You start looking at some of the new Generation 2 gold dots. You're seeing your wound ballistics, and you're not seeing a benefit anymore going to 45 auto over the wounding ballistics of some of the new 9mm ammunition. So now we can go with a 9mm with the same ballistics as a 45 for as far as tissue damage, but we're going with a smaller handgun, larger capacity ammunition, easier to shoot. So it's been interesting to see the trends over the years. I do believe the change to the Glock over the Sig and over these other pistols has been a long time coming. I think a lot of people have always shunned the Glock because of the fact that there's no manual safety. And the reality is your safety is your finger. You don't pull the trigger until you're ready to fire. For all these years, people have carried revolvers with no manual safety, and they never thought twice about it. Now we go to a semi-automatic pistol, and now all of a sudden, because there's no manual safety, now we say it's not safe, which, you know, I totally disagree. You don't put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to fire. This pistol, in fact, I think in many ways is a lot safer than even a revolver, due to the fact that it has so many internal safeties. With a safe action, you have the little tit in the middle here that keeps the trigger from moving. You have a frame pin block safety, and you have a drop safety. So these pistols have been dropped from helicopters with a prime cartridge casing to see if it would still fire, and it would not. So that safety is there. So I definitely believe that the move was it was a good move. The pistols that it had replaced are iconic pistols. The M9 and the Sig, you know, no two pistols have ever had more of a rivalry than those two. For as far as the 45 is concerned, you have the relentless tradition of the 1911. Unfortunately, that tradition sometimes will hurt the soldier, because the guys who are making the decisions on what they're going to procure, they are very hell-bent on their traditions, such as the M1911, to the point where they're putting a gun in the hands of a soldier or a SOCOM operator who really is undergunned. He's outgunned by the enemy. A 45 1911 will not hold its own against a 16-shot pistol. A 16-shot pistol you can actually provide cover fire with. 7 shots you cannot. A 7-round magazine, how many of those do you have to carry this, you know, same amount of ammunition that you would with carrying, you know, 3 or 4 magazines for these 15-shot, 16-shot pistols. So I think there definitely has been a change in the thinking process for as far as the procurement of pistols, and that's you know, the Marine Corps is a very good example of that, with you know, going to their tried true 1911 the M45A1, and then seeing the reality of the situation and saying, you know, this is not a practical firearm, and now we're going with a Glock. So there is some progress, I think, being made within the procurement community of starting to think about what's in the best interest for the U.S. soldier, rather than what's best for tradition. Tradition is, you know, you've heard me say it many, many times, and you probably hear me say it many, many more times. The tradition that our military has hurt our soldiers throughout the history of the U.S. military. It goes back to the Thompson submachine gun, when the Thompson submachine gun was designed for the trench warfare of World War II or World War I. But the U.S. military had access to it, and they said, no, we don't want to waste ammunition. You know, we had this perfect weapon that was developed for the specific kind of warfare that we had in World War I. It wouldn't be until World War II, when the Nazis had the MP40s, that they finally would wake up and say, well, maybe this is a good idea. Same thing with the M1 Garand. The M1 Garand, we had available at the time a 20-shot magazine, but due to tradition, you know, we didn't want to waste ammunition, so now we're going to go with this 8-round clip. So the potential of having every soldier having a 20-shot capacity M1 Garand was overlooked for that 8-shot. We could have had that much better of a weapon. The M16, another good example of the rifle that was truly needed for Vietnam, but they wanted to stay with a wood and steel Springfield Armory or U.S. Armory design and built rifle over a rifle that was far better for the troops and would cause, in the end, a lot of problems. We're going to take the new model Mark 27 out to the range and see how it shoots.
We're not going to put a few rounds through the new Mark 27 SOCOM pistol. This is the Glock 19 Gen 4, which has now replaced the Sig P226 for the Mark 25 pistol within SOCOM. Granted, it's basically a standard old general Glock 19 Gen 4, but this pistol finally, after all these years, has gotten its due. typical Glock pistol. Shoots the bullseye right out. I think that bullseye's gone.
I hope you enjoyed this sort of a recap on pistols of use by U.S. Special Operations Command. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave me a comment. I do hope you enjoyed the video, and please click like and please subscribe. Thank you.